I am the chess strategist, and today we're going to win another chess game. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of our Rapid Chess Speedrun. In today's video, we are going to be playing another 10 plus 5 rapid game. And in our last game, we did play the London system against an opponent who wasn't prepared for it, and we were able to beat them using tactics and some strategies that I thought were pretty interesting within the London that are very common and you can apply to your own games. So today we are going to be playing another game, and let's just see what we get. And I've never been able to predict what pieces we get. White pieces, black pieces, completely random. Today we do get the white pieces, and I think we are going to play d4 again, and we may be playing a Queen's Gambit this time. We're not going to play the traditional London system with bishop f4. We are going to play the Queen's Gambit, and that involves moving the d pawn and then the c pawn. So d4 and then c4. And here our opponent plays what's called the Queen's Gambit Marshall defense by transposition. Usually this move order comes when your opponent plays d5 first, and then they play knight f6 to respond to that. But this move order also happens. So when you play the Queen's Gambit and your opponent does not defend their pawn with another pawn with these two moves, or they don't take, they do it with the knight, what you're going to do is you're going to take every single time. Sends the queen into the center, okay? And this is one option. He could have also taken with the knight, which then we would have played e4. But here we have another way to win a tempo, and that's starting with knight to c3, attacking the queen. Notice that this pawn is defended by the queen, so we're not worried about its defense or anything like that. And now we are just going to go for e4. e4 is a great move here. It frees up our bishops. When both of your pawns are on e4 and d4, your bishops have lots of development, lots of scope, and our knights are going to come out and be on c3 and f3, and we just have the center, and our opponent really doesn't have much. So here we have to be mindful of our central breaks. What are the central breaks that we have? Well, our opponent may try to break in the center with e5, and we have to be careful of that. Would we want to advance our pawn to d5? Would we want to just take? We have to know about that. But yeah, our opponent is taking a little while. So let's just assess the position. Notice how we have an open c file and they have the open d file. So our rook will want to come out to the d file, or the c file most likely. And castling here, since we have the open c file, we probably want to castle kingside. Open files are not where your king wants to be. So, alright, our opponent is taking a little while. Now, where do their pieces want to go? So, on my turn, I like to think very concretely about the variations. Okay, so here our opponent... English. Our opponent develops his knight, attacking the d4 pawn, and we're just going to defend with our knight. He pins, okay, and we can also just defend this pawn again. Now notice he's taken away a defender of this pawn by attacking with the bishop. So what we're going to do is just develop our other bishop. And he has the opportunity to double our pawns here, yes, but we are going to maintain this strong pawn center. Okay, and our opponent prioritizes his development, which I think is probably a wise move. And here we are just going to develop our bishop, so now there's no opportunity for him to double our pawns. And he's decided to pin our other knight. Pinning the other knight has a few ideas. I think the main one is he wants to take with check, force us to take, and then he wins the pawn in the center of the board. And that makes sense. So what's something we could do to prevent that? Well, we could play this move e5, knocking away the knight. But then notice his knight can jump onto the e4 square and create pressure on this knight. So I'm not so sure if that's the move we want to go for. There may be another option. We also just castle. Not really care about the pawn. Keep developing our pieces. Why not? We'll also develop our queen. Notice that the queen's creating a lot of pressure here on this weak pawn. Also advance our queen up here to d3. I like queen d3. Queen d3 is a nice move. First of all, we're vacating the back rank for our rooks, so as soon as we castle, our rooks will be connected, which is nice. We're also just getting our queen onto a more active square. We can play this move eventually, forking the bishop and the pawn. And overall, I just feel like the queen is more active on d3. It has more prospects. Eventually, we could reroute our bishop and open up and create an attack. There's all sorts of ideas here. So I'm liking this queen d3 move. You don't think about it because it doesn't seem like it creates that much, but it's also a very solid defensive move, controlling these pawns. Now, our opponent is creating a lot of pressure on our pawns. And yes, it is true we are playing defense for a little bit, but once their efforts to take our pawns fail, these pawns are an asset, and we're going to be able to break. So this break d5 is something that's very common in these kind of positions. And if we're able to carry that out, we're going to have a devastating attack. We can open up the e-file and use the e-file to attack the opponent's king. Opponent's king, which has been not castled to any side, and we're not sure where it's going to go. But if we can catch out the center, it might be a bad day for our opponent. So, alright. Opponent's taking their time. Very respectable. Taxi Peter does not want to make a dumb move, make a stupid error, something that could jeopardize his position. And we are going to castle. Now, hold up. I think we could castle kingside here for sure. That's obviously a move. But our opponent has indicated to me that he might want to castle long. Do I think that this is dangerous? Not really. Yes, when he castles, he will be creating another attacker on this d4 pawn. But this pawn can be defended with our rooks, and I'm not too worried about that prospect. So we're just going to castle, and he castles long immediately. Notice we have to keep counting attackers and defenders. This knight doesn't really count because he can take it at any point. So we've got 1, 2 defenders, 3 attackers. Temporarily we have this, but we need to put another defender. I'm thinking this rook needs to come out to the file where it belongs. The file where it belongs is the D file, and the other rook is going to come to the C file. Alright, and notice his bishop. This bishop is really not doing much. Like, him taking, there's no threat of it. Him taking, it doesn't do anything but reinforce our center stronger and open up this B file that we can use. From which we're going to be creating all sorts of threats that our opponent can't really respond to. So, the prospect of him taking is actually helping our position. So this pin that was once kind of effective is now really ineffective. This pin also less so. I mean, it's okay. But I like the idea of him taking with that bishop and eventually playing this move e5, opening up the long diagonal for our bishop. Okay, and he's decided to start attacking on the king side with this move h5. And h5 kind of gives us an opportunity to do what we want to do. So now I'm noticing that when he played h5, the square for his bishop has disappeared. There's no square for his bishop anymore, and he's going to have to trade this bishop off eventually. So one thing I've noticed is we can play this move h3. H3 is kind of nice because he has to trade for our knights, and then we can play this idea where we open up the bishop on the long diagonal with e5. So we're going to play h3 here because he cannot retreat. The square has now been taken. He must take. So we're going to trade. And now we've got these bishops defending our center nicely. And we're going to start being able to create a lot of pressure for our opponent here. Notice this bishop is defending the center, but it's also just restricting this advance, this f5 or this g5 advance, which would be so nice. Our opponent wants to play g5 and then g4 and create tons and tons of pressure on us, but we're restricting their movement. And this knight really isn't a great piece anymore. Yes, it's creating pressure on e4, but that's it. Alright, our opponent gets his pawn all the way to h4. On h4, is that pawn really that effective? I can't really say it is. Kind of looks like just a sad piece. It's not really doing much. It's fixing our pawn structure, which could be nice for the endgame, but it's not really that impressive. And we can continue to improve our pieces. One thing I do like is I want to notice, first of all, that this move a3 is not that effective because his bishop wants to be attacking this pawn anyways. So we really don't want to encourage his bishop to go to the square that it's good on. So we're just going to develop our rook. Rook on the file is a nice piece. The rook is creating a lot of pressure against the king eventually, and when we open up, this knight is going to be basically caught in the crossfire. And we're waiting to play this move e5 at the proper moment, basically. We want to move this knight first so that the rook has more influence. Okay, and his knight goes to h7. And I see the idea. The idea is very simple. He wants to play g5. But now that he's played h4, the prospect of g5 is really not that scary. He's going to have to use another preparatory move because our bishop is covering that square, and the h4 pawn is no longer protecting that square. I'm no longer really bothered by that move. I don't think it's that effective at all. And here we could play the move e5 now because it restricts him from going back to the center of the board. Now it's a great move because he can't really go back. He has to go through g5, but we've got that covered. So he's going to have to cover that square another time, or he can reroute like this. I guess he can reroute like that, but yeah, he's really losing the plot here. Okay. An opponent decides to break with f6. But I'm not too scared of it. We should probably take. Because we don't want to allow him to take, because, you know, we'll lose pieces. So we're going to take. And he should probably take with the pawn. But he takes with the knight, leaving this pawn very weak and isolated. I don't think that was his best move. And here we have a few options. We could jump our knight to the center. Jump our knight to the side of the board. We want to access this square. Let's see if we can knock this bishop away first. I like the idea of knocking the bishop away. Alright, and his bishop has gone into kind of just restrict his queen's influence. This is not the square for the bishop, I must say. I really do not think that is the square that he wants the bishop to be on. And here we can attack with the knight. He's gonna have to worry about this. Okay, and he's softened up his position a little bit here. We're going to take... We can win pawns here. What are the pawns we can win here? Well, if we take here with the bishop, he's going to have to take with this because the rook is attacking, and we can win this pawn over here with check. And everything's kind of crumbling for him. So I'll go back through this tactic again. We take here. Our opponent doesn't really want to take like this because we're going to be able to exploit the knight that would be pinned because the pawn would move. So he takes with the queen. We take with the bishop here. He can't take with his queen because we have the rook covering. And then now he takes with the pawn. His pawns are split, and we can take this pawn with check. Alright, and he does defend the pawn, which is nice. No, good for him. And is now we should be creating more threats as many as we can. I think probably lifting our rook is an optimal move. We are wanting a queen trade as soon as we can get it. Queen's kind of offsides here. I kind of want to maybe bring it back to a square where it's better. I like the queen on c4. c4 is a nice square, creating pressure on these pawns. Notice he's got a lot of weak pawns. These pawns are weak and isolated. This pawn's weak and isolated. This pawn is way back. So, yeah, he is having some issues, that's for sure. And here we're just going to try to double our rooks on the file. We do not care if he takes. He can take as many times as you want, but he's just reinforcing our weak pawn in the center anyways. And this pawn may be weak, but for him to attack it with his pawns, he's going to have to allow us to trade it off. And trading it off is excellent. Also notice we do have a passed pawn in our position. Passed pawns are always an asset, especially since we're heading towards an endgame. But here I want to create the attack on this pawn immediately. These pawns are so weak that we should always just go after them as soon as possible. Notice how his rook is attacking this, but our bishop is defending as well as the rook and our king. So this pawn is very well defended. We're not worried about its influence being too much. And alright, his his knight has dropped back. And his knight is now being forced to assume this defensive role, which it really does not want to be doing. That's not the goal for the pawn or for the knight. And we just want to start advancing our passed pawn. That is an idea here. We also want to look for a key idea when we can sacrifice this pawn on d5. That's most always going to be some sort of tactic in this kind of position. Is sacrificing the pawn on d5. Opening up our bishop, and maybe also encouraging him to take like this so we can take like that. Notice we have so much pressure on this file. This file is our vehicle from which to access black's position. Alright, and our opponent lifts his rook. He does not want us to be able to play our pawn forward, but we are going to put our other pawn forward. And we are going to keep advancing our pawn. And our opponent's position is coming apart at the seams. This pawn is a major point of pressure. It has to be defended. We've got 3 attackers. He's got 3 defenders. So his queen, his knight, and his king are tied down to it. But now we've got this passed pawn. His rooks are creating pressure, yes. But our bishop and our rook and our king is defending. So we've got 3 defenders, and he's only got 2 attackers. So even if he added 1 more attacker, it's still not enough. And our passed pawn is just go, go, go. So what is he going to do? I don't know. We'll have to see. An idea I have is to lift one of my rooks over here and start just pushing, pushing, pushing. Okay, and he has continued. He's decided to put his other rook on d5. Okay, to restrict us from playing d5, I guess, is the idea. We can keep pushing our pawn. And every move he gives us to push our pawn is a move that we're going to use. His moves are very difficult here. He has to find defensive moves. He has to find ideas. We don't. We just push our pawn. We make sure that when we advance our pawn, that if he were to attack it, we would be able to defend. So we've got a queen defending right now, so it's not a big deal. But say his rook comes over. Well, we'd be able to reinforce with our rook. So we've got ideas here. Every single position, we've got a way to reinforce our piece if we need to. I like this move, rook d5. I don't think it was a great move, but I think it is nice because it restricts us from ever playing this move d5 and opening up our bishop. Alright, and here our opponent decides that he wants to give up a pawn for a little bit more freedom in his position. I don't think that's terrible, honestly. We are going to take with this pawn. We want to keep this, of course, and we want his queen to be moving out of the way. We have opened up the B file here. If we were to take like this, we'd give him a lot of activity that he doesn't need. Notice that he's got 2 attackers on this square, but the bishop by itself is oh. Okay. And our opponent, yeah. Opponent was playing a great game there, but he kind of just lost the plot there, and yeah. Cracked under pressure, forgot about his queen that was hanging, and we get a win. So yeah, I feel like that was a pretty interesting game. Alright, so let's get to some analysis. We went for d4. Our opponent went for knight f3, which is common. And from this position, there's a lot of different moves that are played. e6, g6. But our opponent transposed back into sort of like a queen's gambit position, because he played d5. So this transposes the same thing as if he played d5 and we played this, and then he played knight f6 here. But anyways, we go back to the move order we got, and we take. You always want to take, because them taking with their knight is actually not that good, because it gives you a free tempo to play e4. Taking with the queen is probably worse, because you get a tempo to develop your knight, and then you get to develop your pawn. So here, we've got a really nice position. We got 2 pawns in the center, and these pawns in the center, while we were defending them the whole game, they do give us more than, they're much more than they're worth. Like, defending them is worth it all the time, because you get control over all these central squares. And your bishops will get developed. When your pawns are not on these 2 squares, the diagonals are not blocked for the bishops. So you're going to get great development eventually. Here our opponent actually gave us an opportunity to play d5. And let's see this line. d5, knight b8 would have been the best move. And then bishop e6, or e3. And here we would have had a very crushing position. Our bishops are coming out. Our queen can come out and attack. And here's an idea that I didn't pay attention to as much, but I realized later in the game would have probably been a good idea. When the light squared bishop comes out in the queen's pawn openings, there's so many ideas that involve moving the queen out and attacking this pawn. This pawn is incredibly weak in the queen's pawn opening for black. White can always attack it when the light squared bishop comes out early. That's why usually the light squared bishop ends up getting buried behind e6 in a lot of queen's pawn openings. So here, I probably should have just gone with a more attacking move like this, or creating some sort of pressure against the pawn, because usually you need to punish the opponent for playing their bishop like this. But we decided to just develop our pieces, and we maintained our center. And we played very principally. We developed all of our pieces to active squares. We noticed that these bishops are kind of passive right now, but once we open up, the bishops are not going to be passive. Once this trade happened, this bishop wasn't passive either. And we were able to get some strong pieces in the center of the board. We got our rooks on the files. We got our knight that's going to be jumping to the center. We've got our bishops that can be opened up at any second to attack a king. So all our pieces are pretty nice. On this knight h7 move, I thought was a good try to start getting your pawns going. But I also thought it was kind of slow. And even though he does break with f6, we are able to get back into the game pretty easily here. And we take, and we're able to win this pawn over here. And these pawns are just incredibly weak. Let's go back through this tactic again. And because apparently it was available in a few different positions according to the engine. Let me turn off the engine for a second. Okay. Knocks us away. We take. Now, if he took like this, this knight is pinned, and the rook is just influencing the king the whole time. So this is just not a good idea. This is no. And our opponent knew this intrinsically. Most of the time, you don't want to open up your king to an attack. So he took with the queen, which I think is the best move. And here you just notice, hey, there's two attackers, two defenders, but when the pawn takes, it's overloaded. The pawn is defending this pawn. It's also defending this knight. So if we give it a job to do, like taking, it has to give up the other job, and we get the pawn. And this is the worst case scenario, because these pawns are now so weak. We can attack them from the file, but this other pawn's blocking the file, so the rook can't come behind. So just the logistics of it make it difficult for our opponent to defend, and we identify weaknesses and attack them. Okay, he's got this pawn which is weak. We're going to put all our pieces on attacking that file. Then, once we realize that our opponent can defend, he has 3 pieces defending, he's tied down. His pieces are stuck defending the pawn, and we're going to keep that pressure, and we're going to do something else. And in this case, the something else was we're going to advance our pawns. We're going to use our pass pawn on the side of the board to create threats of promotion. And here, opponent kind of just very desperate. I think moving his rook over, preventing our pawn from advancing was probably the best move. But he didn't go for that. He went for this move c5, which does just give up a pawn. We take. And here, his queen's under attack. He's got to move it. Where can his queen go? Well, one square is here. Remember, doesn't really want to allow this kind of move, so queen to c6 probably would have been a decent move. Actually, it is the only move in the position, I'm pretty sure, because this square's covered, this square, this square, this square, this square. All these squares are covered for the queen. So yeah, it is literally the only move, queen c6. And from here, we probably would have lifted our rook over, try to create more pressure. But yeah, our opponent just forgets that his queen is hanging and loses his queen. And from here, yeah, this is a lost position for a few reasons. One, well, he can't take with the king here because he loses the knight, which is under pressure. He takes with the rook. We're going to be able to advance here. And this pawn's going to be sitting here nice and pretty, ready to promote. And this is just a lost position. So I don't really blame our opponent for resigning. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And if you made it this far, consider subscribing. I don't really ask us to subscribe that often in the videos. But if you are watching to the end of the video, I assume you like my content. And I do put up daily videos. I have been doing a lot more shorts as well. So shorts, a mix of shorts and rapid speedrun. And also, I did a poll the other day talking about what kind of content you guys are interested in. And a lot of people were talking about that they were interested in chess lessons. So, chess lesson videos will be coming very soon as well. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Do drop a subscribe if you are interested in more content. and I will see you next time. Have a good day.